cards, texts, visits, phone calls, and prayers have kept us in check. Thank you for your love and prayers. We love you all. Johnny and Bobby Ping. So yeah, they've had a year, hadn't you? You've had quite the year. One of those memorable years. That's the thing. You'll always remember it for sure. So, I'm not sure what we'll do with that card. Somebody will get it and put it up somewhere or something. So, as we continue in Mark, we're in chapter 2. We'll go through, we'll probably get done with chapter 2 in a little bit. We've got one story in chapter 3, but all through Mark, we've been looking at how the resistance against Jesus is just pushing, always something going on. And so these next about 3 stories kind of illustrate what's going on there and about how Jesus' authority is being challenged and how the religious leaders challenge it. It may not seem important to us. It may not even seem very significant to us. But as I went through this lesson, once again, there's a lot of things that I want to point out. But Jesus is teaching. It's new. It's new. It's a new direction. It's a new concept. It's new for all humanity because the King has arrived. And so now we're going to look at some of the issues that the religious leaders have with Jesus. And we can see from their issues that they have, we can see the change that's coming and the reasoning for that and how that's pushed us to where we are today. So, in Mark 2:18, the disciples of John and the Pharisees are fasting. Okay, we're not told why they're fasting. And Mike, just if you were here on Wednesday night a few weeks ago, Mike did a lesson on fasting, but doesn't give us any indication of why they are fasting. But we know that the law of Moses established one fast, and that was the Day of Atonement. And that was in Leviticus 16. And that was the law. Now the Pharisees, they fasted twice a week, on Mondays and Thursdays. Okay? So the Pharisees and pious people like the Pharisees and different times were fasting. And so Jesus' disciples aren't fasting. So Jesus and the disciples are not doing, and this is the attitude of the Pharisees, I guess, they're not doing what we've always done. Okay? They must not be devoted to God because they do not fast. Okay? And so that's just a conclusion that if somebody's doing something different, it's easy to jump to a conclusion as to why they're doing it without having the background for it. I don't know if that's human nature. I find myself doing that a lot. I find myself in situations where I've done that and shouldn't have. More often than not, have already garnered an opinion of somebody from either something they've done or something they've said or how they look, where they're from.
Like the beam and the speck.
I'm sorry?
It's kind of like the beam and the speck.
Exactly right, the beam and the speck. And so, why don't your disciples fast? That's the question in this first part of this section in 18 through 22. Why aren't your disciples fasting? So Jesus answers their questions with some illustrations, but for us in our culture to understand the illustration, we've got to kind of know what he's talking about. So we need a little background. So weddings at this time in history, and even now, but in this time in history, the wedding in a village was like the largest social event happening. It was the biggest thing. It would go on for weeks sometimes, And so in contrast to that, fasting was frequently used as a sign of mourning. Okay, you would fast and be in ashes and sackcloth and that kind of thing. So this is what Jesus is trying to get across in the contrast that he uses. In 19, Jesus is saying this is a time for celebration because he has arrived and he is the bridegroom. To fast during the celebration would be unthinkable. Okay? It's just not something you would do. I don't think any of us have ever been to a wedding where everybody's sad and mourning and fasting out of anguish. Maybe one wedding. And it was probably my in-laws doing the anguish and the fasting and the but no, that's not true. That's not true. So it wouldn't be an appropriate time for fasting while Jesus, who's the king, is proclaiming the dawn of the kingdom of God, and that it's in their midst. It's not the time. This is not a time for mourning. This is a time for celebration. This is not a time to be sad. It's a time to be joyous. And so that's what we're talking about here. So he uses two more illustrations to make that same point with the new cloth and the old garment and the new wine or the old wineskin. They're just not compatible. So Jesus' message is he's declaring the kingdom of God to be the new wine that can't be poured into the old wineskin of Judaism. And what he's bringing in the kingdom cannot be combined with the present system of Judaism. Jesus is the new patch. He's the new wine. And I know at the time, and we read it through scriptures, where there was a lot of thought to bring Christianity in under the envelope of Judaism. They were going to, it's okay to be a Christian, but then you got to be circumcised so you can be, follow this Jewish tradition. A lot of that kind of thing was going on, but Jesus is the new patch, the new wine. He's not, this is what I thought was an interesting statement. He's not an attachment. He's not an addition. He's not an appendage to the status quo of Judaism. He couldn't be integrated into the existing religious structure. And we've seen this in Mark already, but Jesus goes to the synagogue, but he doesn't go like everyone else. Jesus goes with the new teaching, and we learned that back in Mark 1. But his authority surpasses the scribes. Now, Jesus honors the old law, but he's not bound by it. Okay? Jesus, lives under the old law in its, he just subordinates himself, is what this guy says, but he exists under the old law, but he's the authority, He comes with the authority of the old law, and he has authority over the old law, and we're going to talk about that here in a minute too. But Jesus didn't come to patch up, and then this was interesting to me too. He didn't come to patch up Israel's religion. Okay, he didn't come to reform Israel's religion. Okay, he come to inaugurate a new era of salvation, and he used Isaiah's words were, Jesus is bringing a new heaven and new earth. It's a whole new order and system in Jesus' kingdom. So unlike the prior prophets, Jesus isn't calling Israel to covenant renewal. He's not calling them for greater submission to the law. None of those things. Jesus has come to fulfill the law and bring to the completion that law in the kingdom of God. So the law of Moses is becoming old and giving way to the law of Christ, which is new. And we talk about that a lot, old and new law.
John,
Yeah.
when we're talking about the fasting, fasting was for people who wanted
Right.
things like that. It was not a schedule.
Right, but the Pharisees had it
Well,
scheduled. You know, I mean, so,
Sanhedrin and them had created additions
oh, absolutely,
to the law
absolutely. Like,
that didn't exist.
yeah, because like I said, if you go back to the old law, the one law of fasting was one day, on the Day of Atonement. And they added all this other stuff. And that's the thing. We can see the value even today. We can see the value, and Mike talked about it, and we had a class on it, but we can see the value of fasting, okay? But we can't apply our value of fasting to someone else. And so that's kind of what was going on here. It's not that Christ opposed fasting. You know, there was a time for that. There was a reason for that, and there was examples of that. So
They fasted twice a week to look holier than the.
sure, absolutely.
Whether or not they actually fasted is yet to be determined.
Yeah. So this age of promise of the old law is coming into the age of fulfillment with the new law. And so the religious leaders can't simply fuse the message in the person of Jesus into Judaism. You know, they can't put those together. Jesus' arrival requires new ways and a new direction. And we see this all the way through Mark, all the way through the gospel. And it comes to fruition, I guess, in Mark 15 that's when the curtain of the temple split from the top to the bottom. So when Jesus was crucified, and so that's just like heavens was torn open at the baptism of Jesus, that indicated the arrival of the Messiah. So he's tearing open the norm of Judaism and ushering in this new age. So these next two stories, we're going to talk about that a little bit. Okay, so in 2:23, 2:28, talking about plucking the grain on the Sabbath. Okay, and so Mark has a different viewpoint than Matthew and Luke on this particular story. It's not, they don't oppose each other. It's just, you know, kind of a different twist on it. So the picking of the grain is not the issue for the Pharisees. That was allowed by law. The farmers were actually supposed to, when they cleared their fields, leave the corners open for the poor and that kind of thing. It wasn't illegal to go through somebody's field picking grain and eating it if you were hungry. That wasn't the problem that the Pharisees were having. The issue in verse 24 is doing work on the Sabbath. Okay, that's where they were having the issue, doing work on the Sabbath. So the Mishnah, which we've talked about before, is the Jewish law, forbid 39 specific acts on the Sabbath. Okay, we're not going to go through those, but one of those was reaping. Okay, so they could, the religious leaders could pinpoint that particular act and define it as reaping, and thus you're breaking the law. It's unlawful. Okay, and so Mark has this view of that particular event he wants us to see, and it's different from Matthew and Luke, but we need to look at the answer that Jesus gives. I never considered this before, but we're going to talk about it. It's important to read this with the answer Jesus gives and not try to defend or justify Jesus, which we find ourselves doing. If we're looking through the scriptures and somebody's saying something, we want to defend Jesus and whatever he's doing. He doesn't need our defending, but I don't know if it's subconsciously or consciously or whatever, we might find ourselves defending Jesus' actions. Okay? And so we don't want to miss the point that Jesus makes. So we're going to talk about that, how he handles this charge that he's him and his disciples reaping on the Sabbath. So, following in 25 and 26, he refers to the actions of David. Okay, so he doesn't say, well, we'll talk about it. He refers to the actions of David. So he talks about when David was in need and hungry, and how he and his companions went into the house of God and ate the bread, which is not lawful for any but the priests to eat. And he also gave it to those that are with him. So Jesus acknowledges what David did. David did what was not lawful to do. Now, this is where we want to kind of start defending Jesus, but he doesn't do that. Jesus concludes, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is the Lord, even of the Sabbath. And this is why that's important. Was Jesus breaking the Sabbath law? It depends on which school of thought you're from. If you're looking from the Pharisees' point of view, they would see that as a breaking of the law. Okay? If we look at Jesus' point of view, which we're going to see here, that's not the way he argues. He doesn't say that it's not it's not lawful. He doesn't say it's unlawful. He just says he's not interested in defending himself, but for the Pharisees to see, his authority. Okay, to help them recognize who Jesus is and his authority in that particular situation and all situations. So Jesus doesn't debate what constitutes for work on the Sabbath. That's what we would do. It's not really work. That's not work. He wasn't reaping. He was. So we can start arguing and arguing for Jesus and defending him. And he doesn't address any of the distinctions between the Pharisees' traditions and what the law of Moses actually says. Okay? He doesn't say, that's what you say, but this is actually what the law says. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't defend himself in that way at all. Okay? Jesus doesn't even defend David. Jesus says that what David does or did was unlawful. He admits the fact. He admits that their argument, or his argument to them about David, what David did was unlawful. He doesn't argue that hunger and taking basic nourishment doesn't violate the Sabbath. It's just like, there's laws at this time that if you stole a loaf of bread, it wasn't really stealing. If you're stealing to feed your family, it was acceptable. Okay, it wasn't anything like that at all. Okay, and that's, if you look at the Matthew account, that's kind of where Matthew's focus was. But Mark's not talking about this. He's talking about, this is his point. If David, the Lord's anointed, and his companions could eat the consecrated bread, how much more can the Messiah, David's greater son, and his companions? Okay, so if David can do it, it just makes sense that someone greater than David could also do it. Okay, the relationship between the law and the Son of Man is Jesus' point of focus. So if regulations to protect the holy could be set aside for David and those that are with him, how much more so for the Messiah, who has supreme authority over the Sabbath? Because the Sabbath was made for humanity. So David's authority, in the eyes of the Pharisees, legitimized, made it legitimate, legitimized his, because of who he was, what he did was okay. Okay, he had the authority. He was the king. Okay, but David, if you think about when this was happening, he was on the run, and he had been anointed king, but he hadn't been established as king. The priest had anointed him, but he hadn't taken the throne. Okay, so he was kind of in that limbo stage. So David is anointed as king, but not on the throne yet. So this is where Jesus is at also. Jesus is anointed. We read about that in his baptism in chapter 1, verse 10. But he's not enthroned. His enthronement occurs at his death and resurrection and ascension. So David is the anointed king whose authority has not been recognized within Israel, except for the guys that were with him. You know, this guy terms them the band of outcasts. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, he shows the Pharisees' lack of understanding of the Sabbath. That his primary purpose wasn't to be a burden, way to go out and judge somebody, but his primary purpose was to be a day of rest.
Right, and we're going to talk about that. We'll get to that. You're skipping ahead.
Way of looking at all the law really in the wrong way.
Oh, absolutely.
It was to serve man, not to be served.
Yeah. And I don't hold that against them because that's the way they were taught. You know, that's how they were brung up. That's how they were schooled. That's how they were taught. And so, but yeah, we're going to get to all that. So, the relationship between the law and the Son of Man if it could be set aside, and he has supreme authority over the Sabbath, and David's authority legitimized his actions, we find David in the situation where he's not enthroned. Okay? Now we find Jesus is the anointed king, whose authority has not been recognized within Israel, and except for his band of outcasts. Okay, so they correlate that away. So Jesus is not breaking the law of Moses or being shown as a sinful person. Jesus is doing this deliberate thing, like the refusal to fast, and a sign that the new king is here, the kingdom is arriving, the new system and a direction is upon him. And Jesus' point is not that humanitarian needs trump the law. His point is that the authority of the king has arrived. And this is kind of illustrate the point a little bit. Obviously not exactly, but when we think about it, okay? When the president comes in his motorcade, okay, drives through the red lights and the stop signs to get where he's going, is the president a lawbreaker for that? Okay. Did the president break the law? Okay. At that point, his authority is greater than the law of that little red dot. You know, his authority is greater than the law of the stop sign. And so that's the point Jesus is making. The Sabbath was made for man, but the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He's not a lawbreaker because of his authority and who he is. Okay? And that's important as he starts to establish his authority over the Sabbath, because as we come into this next point, if we read the story and we study the story from that view, if we look at Jesus' authority over the Sabbath, and then we start looking at what he did on the Sabbath, rather than what he did on the Sabbath, and then try to defend him for it because of his authority, it takes on a different light. Because in Mark 3, 1 through 6, there's a man with a withered hand in the synagogue. Okay? We all know that story. There's many like it in the scriptures, but this happens in the synagogue. It's on the Sabbath. It's a withered hand. So what are the people looking at Jesus to see? Okay? Well, the guy with the withered hand, I know exactly what he's looking for Jesus to do. The ones that have faith in who Jesus is, you know what they're looking for Jesus to do. Okay? The ones that are trying to trap Jesus, you know what they're looking for Jesus to do. Okay? And so they're not looking to see if Jesus, the Pharisees aren't looking to see if Jesus will heal him. Okay? They're not looking for the gift. They're looking for the trap that comes with that gift. Okay? They're looking to trap Jesus to see if Jesus is going to heal him on the Sabbath. And they want to see if they're going to heal him on the Sabbath, not to see if he can heal. They want something to accuse him of so they can get rid of him, so they can put disdain on him or break his following or do any of those things, disparage him, in some way because of the law and the Sabbath and that kind of thing. So they're going to look to see if Jesus is going to heal him on the Sabbath so they can accuse him. And we can see the hardness of the heart of these people. This man has a withered hand. He's now standing in front of the Lord who has come to heal. And so Jesus asked that question. He asked that question. Is it lawful to do good or harm on the Sabbath? To not heal would be to do this man harm. Are we not going to look to do good for this man because it's the Sabbath? That's exactly what the leaders think, okay? And Jesus is not happy about that particular situation. He said, it's just like talking to children. How can you not understand what's going on? How can you be so blind to what we're going to call the truth? How can you be so blind to the truth of who Jesus is and what he does as to forbid this man from being healed because of what day it is? Okay, how can you be so hard-hearted? And in Mark 3 and 5 it says he looked around them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Okay, and I like to think if one of the Pharisees had a withered hand, what would he do? Okay, would he have any issue at all with getting healed on the Sabbath? I think not. I think not. But then from the human point of view, to eliminate all the nonsense, just wait till tomorrow. That seems to fix the whole thing. That's not what we're talking about. But we find that kind of thing in our mindset. Don't want to rock the boat. Don't want to stir things up. Just do it tomorrow. Just come back tomorrow, and no problems then. But this is where Jesus is at in his ministry. They don't see who Jesus is. They don't see what he's come to do. They don't even understand the meaning of the Sabbath. And I think that's kind of where some of the disbelief comes from on Jesus' part, that it's been so diluted and so misused and so it's so far away from what it's supposed to be, he just can't understand it. So the Sabbath was a time for worship. The Sabbath was a time for remembering how God had liberated his people. God had given Israel rest from oppression, from the Egyptian slavery. He delivered the people, and that's the Sabbath was a mark of God's people whose lives had been transformed by the Exodus that God had performed for them, and they were to remember that every week. That was the Sabbath, okay? The initial meaning of the Sabbath, that's where that came in, okay? That was what it was for. That's why it was designated. So now Christ, the one who's come with authority to cast out unclean spirits, heal the lame, give sight to the blind, heal the sick, call sinners for healing, he's standing in front of this man who needs healing. And he understands that that's what the Sabbath is all about, okay? He understands the spirit of the Sabbath, setting people free. Jesus is going to set this man free from his infirmity, from his withered hand. And along with that, the arrival of the kingdom is the healing of all nations. Okay? Go ahead, Mark. I see you got that thing cocked. You might as well stick it up there.
He was trying to prove all through this whole thing, just like you say, his authority. The scribes had put so many rules on him, they could pull the ox out of the ditch they're called in there, but they can't heal him then.
Right.
You've lost the whole point of the Sabbath.
And that's kind of what Brian was talking about. That, you know.
Trying to do just like you said, teaching his authority, just like he forgives somebody of their sins. He said, which is easier?
Right.
I've got the authority. I'm the new. I
And
fulfilled the old law. Here's the new law.
Right. And a lot of times as I'm reading through here, it feels like he's doing a lot. You know, he's healing. He's expressing his authority. He's explaining the kingdom. He's explaining who he is and what he's done. He's showing his power. He's showing his wisdom in the temple and in the synagogues. He's bringing in a new religion. I mean, there's so much going on. You know, there's just a lot going on. You know, and it's not just, you know, he doesn't focus on one thing and then get that taken care of. You know, and make sure everybody understands this. We're going to build on that, and we're going to go on to this next thing, and then we're going to build on that. It's just all just. And so, the arrival of Jesus and his kingdom is the rescuing of people, bringing light into darkness, hope to the hopeless. It's help, hope, and healing. That's what the Sabbath is all about. It's about restoration. The Sabbath is about restoration. But the religious leaders don't see that. They're so hard in their heart that they don't understand the meaning of the Sabbath and the meaning of what Jesus is doing. All they can see is the law, their vision of the law, their rules surrounding those laws, and they're so concerned about the Sabbath regulations, they don't want Jesus to heal this man. Okay? They don't want. And there's lots of levels to that, I'm sure. But if you just look at it from their understanding of the Sabbath point of view, they're not willing to put aside any of what they have added as far as regulations go for the good of this man. Okay, and like I said, we'd just put it off till tomorrow, and all of this would be done. So it's just stunning that someone can be so focused, and yet it happens in the religious world today. You know, always that you they talk about you can't see the forest for the trees and that kind of thing, and this is kind of what was going on here, and what Christ was trying to allow them to see. Okay, he wasn't forcing it on them. He wasn't debating them. He wasn't trying to defend himself in any way. He was just allowing them to helping them come to the conclusion of who he was and what was actually going on and what the Sabbath meant and that kind of thing. So Jesus is saying that he's the Lord over the Sabbath. It's a whole new direction. He's not patching up the old system, and we talked about that. And if you think about it, Jesus is the Sabbath. He's the source of the deep rest we need. He's come to completely change the way we rest. He's the one who gives the true rest that we need. The 1 day a week rest was just a taste of the deep divine rest that we do need. And Jesus is the source of that rest. And Jesus wants to see that our hope, our help, our restoration, our healing, our joy, our satisfaction, all of those things are in him. All our joy and everything that goes with it is in him. All our healing and everything that goes with it, our restoration, all of that is in him. You know, as humankind looks for that. There's no way to fill that void without Christ. It's just not. And so, although the world may try, there's just no way to fill that void.
The Pharisees were worried about their position in the synagogue or.
Absolutely. They had a completely different focus, and it wasn't one that suited their position. Okay, and they were chastised for it quite a bit, because they were the ones that were supposed to not only lead the nation of Judah, they were also supposed to do it in a way that the rest of the world could see God in them. Okay, and that's where we find ourselves as Christians today. We're not only supposed to do the things that we're commanded, we're supposed to do things in such a way that the world sees God in us and brings them to Him. I mean, that's why we're here. Okay, so and the Sabbath and the definition of that rest, you can only be satisfied in Jesus, and you can only rest in Him, and you'll never find rest in anything or anyone else but Jesus. Okay. In Matthew 11, it says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke, learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls." And so, as Jesus came, and then he brought this new system in this new direction, that He is the Sabbath, that rest is in Him. Any turmoil that we have, we can enjoy rest. If we come to Jesus and see Him as the restorer and healer of our soul, okay, He's not a patch. That's all right. I ain't got but about no more. I got no more. Is what I got. I got nothing. I got no more. But I can't fill 5 minutes. I know I ramble a lot, but I can't fill 5 minutes. But anyway, as Jesus came into the world to restore the world, the things we need to recall and remember are, we were part of the world, and now that we're in Christ, we're in that rest, we're in that Sabbath, and the invitation is to everyone, okay, and we need not to forget that. We like to, I'm not going to say we, but I'm going to say, I find myself excluding those that I don't know if I don't think they're worthy, if I've already prejudged someone that they don't deserve the gospel. Are they not worthy of the gospel? Are they not? I've already decided whether or not they'll be receptive to the gospel. And it's just so bizarre to me when I think inwardly and think that to myself. How arrogant do I have to be to even have that thought? How arrogant do I have to be that I have already decided that my neighbor doesn't deserve the gospel? That my friends don't deserve the gospel? How can I be that guy? And so I think that's why I find I don't hold it against. I don't judge the Pharisees for their actions a lot of times in Scripture. Okay, I don't judge the religious leaders because I can see that I don't know that I would be any better. If I was taught one thing one way from all the smartest people in the world up until this point, I would rely on my education. I would rely on my status. I would rely on where I am and who my teachers were and what my position is in the community. And I would rely on all of those things before I would find humanity. And so I can see the difficulty that the Pharisees had. I can also see the conniving and the behind the scenes trying to get Jesus because of they're threatening he's threatening my authority, or he's threatening my position, or he's threatening my paycheck, or any of those kind of things. But I also want us to see, along with that, Jesus didn't argue with them. Okay, he didn't defend himself as far as he agreed with them a lot of times that this David taking the showbread, that was unlawful. There's no doubt. To the letter, that was unlawful, and yet that's looked past because of who David was. Okay, so I don't know on which side of the fence I would be if I was a Pharisee. Would I be sneaking to Jesus at night to kind of try to figure out what's going on with nobody could see me, just be sneaky? Or would I just flat out ignore all of the evidence, all of the sign, all of the miracles and the good that Jesus was doing just to hang him on a cross? And I hope to think that I would not be that way. And I would hope to think that we can be better tomorrow than we were today when it comes to stuff like that. So anyway, thank you for your attention. Appreciate all your comments. I hope I got to everything I said I was going to get to. I may not have. Couldn't tell you exactly what I said, but
I think that we've confused, we think human nature and culture are not the same.
oh yeah,